this is Dave Prior. Welcome to Leading Agile Sound Notes. Mike Cottmeyer has carved some time out of his busy afternoon today. Mike, thank you for being here.
Awesome, Dave. Happy to be here, man. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
So Mike has very kindly agreed to entertain a question I have. And if you haven't seen Mike in action, one of the coolest things to get to watch is when people reach out and ask for help, watching Mike start to understand what's going on with them. So if you could maybe high level, at least as a starting point, Mike, when people call or when they write and they're asking for help, like what is your process for trying to figure out how we can support them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually remember very vividly the moment I kind of went, oh, I actually have a process. It's actually something that I do, and I do it repeatedly every time. It's like you do something enough and you're like, oh, okay, there's a pattern here, right? And it's pretty cool. Well, so like whenever I, whether it be a sales call or somebody, just calls up and says, hey, can I pick your brain? Or whether it be like in a situation with a client on site, something like that. The thing that I learned a long time ago is you can't presume to know the answer. You can't presume to be able to tell somebody else their problem. Right. Because everybody's situation are oddly common, but oddly unique at the same time. And so what I kind of learned what I do is I usually break up almost any conversation conceptually into three parts. And the first part is I ask questions, but there's a methodology to that, right? I ask questions and then I teach and then apply. And so the way it kind of works, right, is if you get me on the phone and you say, hey, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that, like, help me understand. What I do is I walk through our mental models, right? Leading Agile's mental models. You and I have talked about first principles a lot. We always go back to that same thing. So I operate under the assumption, and it's true, I want to say all the time. I there's every bit of me wants to hedge and say almost true, almost all the time. But like, I can't think of a situation where somebody's called me where the problem isn't somewhere in the team's backlogs, working tested software kind of a thing. So if you get me on the phone, the first thing I'm going to ask about is like, talk with me about how you form teams. What are your teams made up of? What are they organized around? What kind of problems are they trying to solve? Right. And I try to get people to tell me, because I suspect, because it holds true every time, that people have team formation strategy problems, right? They have, they don't have everyone and everything necessary to deliver what they're responsible for. They have external dependencies. They have people that are matrixed across multiple teams, right? All those things, right?
Sure.
And so there's almost like always like a team formation pattern failure. And then I'll go, okay, well, tell me a little bit how you do backlogs, right? We test like invest model, card conversation confirmation. As a user, I want some feature to get some benefit, right? That kind of thing. You start hunting, like, how you doing backlogs? Are they small enough to where the teams can do a handful of them in the sprint or something like that?
Okay.
And, because what I'm hunting for is, can the teams process a backlog item during sprint planning? Can they exit sprint planning with some reasonable idea of what they can commit to, what they can actually accomplish at the end of the sprint? I started asking questions around, is velocity stable? Are they doing estimation? All that kind of stuff. Are they swarming? Do they have burn up or burn down within the sprint? Right? All those kinds of things. And, then, can you get to a definition of done at the end of the sprint? Is it potentially shippable? Is it testable? Can the customer look at it? Can the customer walk through it? Right? And looking for all kinds of different variations on definition of done.
Okay.
And so just to re-anchor, right, we're really talking about like basic team level Scrum kind of stuff. Right? There's different models as you go up the stack, right? And so what'll happen is that I'll spend, 15, 20 minutes in an hour just probing, just getting them to tell me stuff. And then what will generally happen after that is I'll say, okay, well, based upon my experience, based upon industry best practice, these are the things that I see that work. And so I'll start talking about like what well-formed backlog looks like.
So
Why is it?
not telling them what's wrong, telling them what works.
Yeah. Well, so this is the art of it, right? Is when you ask questions, I'm walking this framework: teams, backlogs, working tested
Right.
software, structure, governance, metrics, practices, culture, systems first, dependencies, things like that. So I'm hunting for what I know to be common failure modes, but I'm not telling them anything about themselves at this point. Okay.
Can I ask you one question about
Yeah,
this?
sure. Yeah.
So this I think would apply to anybody at a coaching level as well. So you said that you're kind of purposely keeping yourself from knowing the answer. And I'm wondering how you hold that while you're kind of running around poking, looking for the weaknesses, but at the same time holding on to the idea that I'm not going to decide this is what the answer is until I'm done.
So here's the interesting thing, and this is what even a lot of coaches or consultants don't understand, I think, is knowing the right answer in our field is like table stakes. I mean, it's the price of admission. If you don't know how to do Scrum, if you don't know how Scrum works, you don't know how to do transformation work, like whatever, right? I mean, that's why you're employed. That's what you do, right?
Yeah.
So knowledge is the price of admission. Influence and getting somebody to hear you and getting somebody to act upon the things that you say is a totally different challenge. So if you came up to me and you said, "Hey, Mike, I'm having a hard time, getting Scrum to work. Teams can't stabilize velocity. Sprint planning's, not going well. Daily stand, like you tell me all these things." I go, "Well, so here's your problem, right? You have to have backlogs this way. You have to have teams this way. You have to do this way. You have to do blah, 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 blah. And if you're not going to do that, you're going to fail." Boom.
Yeah.
Right? And they go, "Well, I can't do any of that. Like, I can't make any of that fix. So I guess I'm just screwed."
Well, and there are a lot of thought leaders who are kind of like, well, then you're not cool enough to work with me at that point. I mean, there's people like that
right.
out
So,
there.
but the process, right? So the process is always about getting people to see. So like one example that I use that I think is really super interesting to me, and this is real life, multiple real life examples of this, is if you're in a room and somebody comes up to you and says, "How do you write a user story?" Right? Product person comes up and says, "How do you write a user story?" And we just go, "Oh, I know the answer. Boop, 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 boop. This is how you write a user story." I want to say 9 times out of 10, right? It probably depends upon the circumstances. But most of the time when somebody's asking a question like that, there's a meaning, there's a reason behind why they're asking it. So, and this is probably going to frustrate some people, but typical consultant stuff, it's like, anytime anybody asks me a question, I'm like, "Why do you want to know that?" Right? Because here's the thing. If somebody asks me even a straightforward question and I don't know why they're asking me for it, I can assume, oh, they just want to know how to write a user story. But often, especially in a world of where you're changing people's stuff, you're moving their cheese, right?
Right.
A lot of times there's fear and there's resistance and there's hesitancy, and people don't necessarily feel safe. And so I would say, maybe there's a 20% chance that if somebody asks me how to write a user story, that they actually want to know how to write a user story. I'd say the other 80% is they're looking for reasons not to have to write user stories.
Okay.
And so this is like a really common scenario. How do I write a user story?
Yeah.
And they go, "Well, okay, this is what happens. You do, this is the format. This is how you work with the team. This is how it happens, blah, blah, blah." And in the back of their mind, they're going like, "Yeah, no way. That's like I'm a product person. That's business analyst stuff."
Yeah.
Or I've got to work with customers and do important things. That's like something somebody else does. Right. So they're probably listening to your answer and thinking of 1,000 reasons why they don't want to do that. Okay. So if I can sit down with somebody and go, "Okay, cool. Like, well, talk to me a little bit about what it is you're trying to, why you're asking."
So rather than playing into their bias confirmation needs, you're just taking them down.
Yeah. Well, so like Seth Godin, I'm going to rabbit hole. Seth Godin talks about, Seth Godin's a marketing guy who I read. He's written a bunch of different stuff that people might appreciate. Linchpin, Tribes. He's written a bunch of stuff on marketing. He's one of my favorite blog people. And one of the things he talks about is with resumes. He goes, "Resumes are a waste of time." And you're like, "Well, why are resumes a waste of time?" The only thing a resume does is give somebody a reason to exclude you. Oh, they don't have the right certifications. They don't have the right work experience. They don't have the right this. They don't have the right that. Right. So when people are looking at resumes, often they're not looking for a reason to hire you. They're looking for a reason to whittle
you out. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's kind of human nature. It's like not every question, not every ask is at face value. So getting back to how do you know the answer? And I'm gonna augment your comment and have the self-discipline to not just answer the question for them or tell them what they're doing wrong.
Okay.
Is you recognize that you're playing a longer game of influence and not a game of I'm the smartest guy in the room. So let me go through again, right? So you start off and you're asking questions, but not just any questions, not random questions. You're asking questions that go into your knowledge of common failure modes.
Mm-hmm.
So I know almost everybody can't form teams right. They can't build backlogs right. They can't produce working tests of software right. They don't do networks of teams and orchestration of requirements between teams very well. They don't measure very well. They don't govern work very well, right? They're just not organized well at scale. So I'll hunt teams, backlogs, working tests of software, structure, governance, and metrics. I'm looking for dependency issues. I'm looking for mental model problems about the way they're trying to do their transformation. So I'm asking questions in those targeted areas. And then if I'm in the room, I'll transition. I'll go, hey, do you mind if I go to the whiteboard? Or if I'm on the phone, I'll say, hey, do you mind if I just share a few things with you? And I don't tell them anything about themselves, nothing about themselves. What I tell them is that from my experience, industry standard best practices, what I've seen work is teams need to be formed this way. Backlogs need to be formed this way. And working test software needs to be produced like this. And then I go up, and this is how teams structure.
So there's no judgment towards them at all.
No judgment. But let me tell you what I'm doing, right? The things that they tell me that are jacked up are the things that I teach to. Okay. So now get this, right? You just told me what your failure mode was. Without telling you anything about yourself, I attempt to share with you best practices from my experience. Take it or leave it, right? I'm not judging you. I'm not saying anything about you. And if you do that well, right, and you create sufficient connection and relationship in the conversation, what will usually happen is that somebody will be like, in the back of their mind, they're like, I just told him that wasn't working very well. And he just told me something to do that's not what I'm doing today.
Right.
And it creates cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
And they want to resolve the cognitive dissonance. And it will almost always result in well, okay, I never really thought about it that way. How would I do that here? Or given this constraint, how would I make that happen? Given that constraint, how would I make it happen? And if you notice, right, then what they've done is they've asked me for help. And at the point that they've asked me for help, then I have permission to coach them, right? And again, right, and we fall into the trap. We think that just because somebody called us up and asked for our help that they really want our help. They don't always really want our help, right? I don't think anything.
They just want to feel like they're right half the time.
Well, maybe they're looking for validation, or maybe they're looking just to exchange ideas, or whatever, right? And no judgment, right? But just because they asked you for help doesn't mean that you have permission to tell them that they're wrong. Okay. They have to ask, right? And so the game often is helping them understanding enough about their world, having empathy, having a point of view that speaks to that empathy, like that understanding of their situation, and then creating enough relational safety to where they feel like they can go, well, okay, that's really a hard problem for us. What would you do? And then I can go down that thread because that's what they're interested in. And I can unpack it. I can ask them harder questions. I can give them examples. I can do what if scenarios. I can give, whatever I need to do to help them see that there's a gap to close here.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It does. So we have these calls leading Agile, these O&I calls. And
so for everybody else, it's something I lifted off of Stanley McChrystal's Team of Teams book. Something he did, Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Middle East or something. He called it Operations and Intelligence. So 3 days a week, we have these operations and intelligence meetings where we do like account reviews, content presentations. Right? It's just a way of keeping us all on the same page as an organization. So it's all hands, it's open to everybody. And so there you go. That's the O&I call it.
And people that I've interviewed at the company have said that a lot of them said this is one of the most amazing and most valuable things at the company, because nowhere else do you get direct access to leadership so frequently.
Well, the thing that's interesting about it, right? And this is a total aside from, I think, where you want to go, but most every morning we do around the room with the leadership team, and we are directly talking to each other, right? I mean, like, obviously we don't talk about like people issues and performance issues in that regard, but we're talking about sales pipeline. We're talking about profitability. We're talking about problems that we're having. I'm holding my execs to account. Like, I mean, it's raw, right? It's like inviting 160 people to a staff meeting.
Yeah.
Right. Like it would normally be behind closed doors. So
Yes.
It's a meeting, right? So yeah.
All right. And on some of these calls, different groups within the organization, communities of practice in our organization, come and present stuff. And last week we had a situation where a group was presenting and you were playing the part of the customer, asking a question, and they were attempting to kind of lead you in a certain direction that kept going away from your question. And you kept trying to help them see that like what you're doing is kind of denying my question and trying to answer something I'm not asking you about. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how you see that line, because that would be a really easy thing to stumble over, I think.
Yeah. Well, so this is the interesting thing that we have going on. Again, just to establish some more context. As you might imagine, like leading Agile, we're over 160 people now, and there's a lot of different things that are going on in our different clients, and there's different shades of gray around the different work that we're doing. Different clients like interpret the work differently. We're trying to figure out how to get more authoritative point of view out in market, whether it be via podcasts or blogs or whatever. And everything can't single thread through me in that regard anymore. So these content presentations are often, they can sometimes be things that are kind of part of our core frames and the way that we think about the world. But oftentimes these are presentations that people are giving based upon their work to help literally educate me and the executive team about how we are advancing the state of the art on the ground with our clients. And so one of our senior consultants was I think doing something around OKRs or something like that. And it's just that's not my deep expertise. I mean, I'm conversant, understand, and that kind of a thing. And what happened was I think this person wasn't, in this particular case, prepared to give like a presentation. They thought they were just kind of giving an update on something, and then the content presentation was going to be the next hour. But I dug into something, right? Something tweaked my brain, and I want to dig into it. And and so what it ended up being was like a very solid teaching moment in that world for how do you make sure that before you answer a question, you understand the other person's like worldview, their point of view, right? That kind of a thing. I know we've talked about on this podcast, but it's probably been a minute, about this thing that we use internally called an influence trust loop or a trust influence loop.
Yes.
And what we talk about is the idea of when you have access to somebody in power, in my company, obviously me or my leadership team, but it can be your client on site. It can be an executive at the client on site. When you're dealing with somebody in power and you have access to them, like the first job is to establish empathy, which means that I need to understand their problem the way, and here's the key phrase, the way they understand their problem. Okay. And so it's not just enough.
You should pause for a second on that one, because that was a really big deal. And also part of you asking them why they're asking the question that they're asking.
Yeah. Well, so 9 times out of 10, like if somebody calls me, like, and it's a sales process or something, I've sat in boardrooms with the C-suite of Fortune 50 companies. And I'm like, look, it's a really high powered room. Why are you guys here? Why do you guys want to do this? Right. Because I need to hear them say what's important to them.
Right.
And what they care about. And so whenever you have access to power, You need to understand what they're concerned about from their point of view as they understand it. Okay. And then the dance, right? And so we talked about one way of doing this with this permission to coach thing, but the dance is I need to have a point of view, a way to solve their problem that resonates with them.
And with their problem.
And yeah, with them,
their perception of
their problem, right? Because think about all the different ways that can fail. And this is kind of what happened on that call that you want to talk about the other morning is what I was trying to do is I was trying to talk about OKRs, and what we were really hunting was the nature of almost like the recursive nature of OKRs. And so like you have outcomes and you have key results that lead up to those outcomes. But as you kind of like go down the stack, as they cascade down, it's like one person's key result is like another person's outcome. And then they just kind of hop down the organization that way, right? And they're all kind of nested into this loop, right? So that's really what we were kind of hunting. But what we didn't do a good job of on that call, and again, in all fairness, person wasn't prepared. They kind of walked into the arena with me and didn't know they were in for a fight, right? And so we're hunting down that. And I kept getting reframed and reframed and reframed and reframed and reframed.
Which is also something I want to make sure everybody knows that like reframing is something we talk about here as well. That is part of the job. You have to be able to do that.
Yeah. So sometimes, for sure. You have to be able to hold your point of view in a room. So like when I walk in, I'm dealing with teams. I got to get them to the teams, backlogs, working test, the software frame, the structure, governance, metrics frame, dependencies, kill, agile frame, structure first frame or systems first frame, then practices and culture, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff where it is perfectly appropriate to reframe somebody's perspective. Mm-hmm. But when you're playing an influence game, the idea is that you need to demonstrate empathy for my problem the way that I understand my problem. Key point, the way I understand.
Instead of telling you have the wrong problem.
Instead of telling me I have the wrong problem, or I need to think about my problem. Now, again, right, sometimes you swing for the fences, right? And I've done that in sales cycles too, right? Where they're like, well, I think I have a safe adoption problem. I'm like, you have a team's backlogs, working tested software problem. And I'll sit in that discomfort for an hour and a half and work with them to try to get them to see. Because if I can't get that core point across and nobody believes what I say in that room, then that's not what we do, right? Like I'm not a safe implementer, right? I'm not a process implementer. I'm a organizational design, organizational structure guy, right?
So
go ahead.
I want to dig into this part a little bit. So you reach a point where you understand what you believe the issue is through their lens.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to make a choice. I'm either going to brute force this by telling them like, no, here's what your problem actually is.
There's some art to that brute force, but
or I'm going to meet you where you are and I'm going to help you go through these three different steps, right? Ask questions, educate, and kind of connect everything. How do you know like which one is that just like practice that you get that figured out?
Well, so we're going down a whole little side paths here. So I'm going to see if we can go down these little recursive back up, right?
I'm trying to help people understand. I want folks to understand how it works for your brain.
One of the things that's like really common in our industry is somebody calls up and they say, okay, well, what's the difference between leading Agile's approach and safe?
Yeah.
I'm like apples and oranges, right? Like I have zero issue with safe, zero issue with less, zero issue with any of them, right? No problem at all with any of them. The way that I look at the world of methodology is that every methodology that's out there worked for somebody in some context and they thought it was a great idea. So they wrote it down and built a certification or wrote a book or did something, right? Okay. So I don't think, all of the people that are out there doing this stuff have done it and it works. Right. The thing that people miss is that the underlying conditions of the organization that were in place that made that methodology work were as key to the success as the methodology itself. Okay. So if you want to do Scrum, you must form a complete cross-functional team that is almost pretty solidly dependency free.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
They have to be able to operate off of a backlog that comes from a product owner that has these attributes and is able to build the backlog with these things, right? You have to have the technological infrastructure to be able to produce a working tested increment of software. So what happens is that what I tell people with the methodologies, and I believe this to be true, is that all of the methodologies out there are built upon what I would consider like a common reference architecture. Okay. They all basically have some sort of team level function, whether it be Scrum or Kanban. They typically have some sort of orchestration tier, a way that dependencies are handled and cross-cutting concerns are handled across teams. And they have some way of being able to align with some sort of higher order governance framework or roll-up of capabilities, right? And so there's an underlying reference architecture underneath all of this that gets manifest in a reference implementation, a process reference implementation, that again is dependent upon the underlying characteristics of the organization. So if somebody calls up and says, hey, I'm struggling with Scrum, or hey, I'm struggling with SAFe, I do the same things: teams, backlogs, working tested software, structure, governance, and metrics.
So you're checking for the conditions.
I'm checking for the conditions. I'm trying to see what conditions that they have created.
Okay.
And what I have to convince them is that, or I have to help them see rather, because I believe it's true, universally true, is that if you don't get the underlying conditions right, your methodology won't work. Never will work. It's not a matter of doubling down on the practices of Scrum, and it's not a matter of doubling down and getting better at the practices of SAFe. It will never work unless the underlying conditions are created. And so when you say, what's the difference between Leading Agile's approach and what's the difference between SAFe or something, what I would say, again, apples to oranges comparison. Yeah. We focus on the reference architectural patterns of organizational design that enable methodology.
Okay.
And our job is to adapt the methodology to deal with the underlying organizational constraints while we are changing the organizational constraints to accommodate your methodology of choice. Okay. So said another way, if you want to do SAFe, fine. I have zero issue with SAFe. Yeah. I mean, what we do in Leading Agile is close enough to SAFe to where, like, who cares, right? But the challenge is we built a methodology for how to move the organization to create those conditions. And that's what we do, right? So we create the conditions for the methodology to work.
I have like 50 questions.
Okay, go for it. Well, all I was going to say is just a lot of times people, they don't want to buy that story, right? And if I can't convince them,
hard.
I can go into the lean stuff. I can go into capsulation orchestration. I can go into dependencies. I can go into process control. I can go into like all kinds of different things, right? Depends on how deep you want to go.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if I can't get them to see the relationship between the process and the organizational structure, then there's just nothing to sell, right? There's nothing to do. And so you asked me the question, you're like, well, how do you make the decision? Well, at the end of the day, I'm not going to sell somebody something or commit to doing a project for somebody that I don't believe will be successful. I mean,
okay.
We've literally turned down hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars of training engagements.
Yeah.
Because if they're not going to do the organizational structure work, our brand is going to be attached with a failed transformation.
Okay.
It's not that we're perfect, right? I mean, sometimes we get in and it's messier. Sometimes people don't want to do things, or we get out, we're not influential enough. So I'm not saying that every single thing Leading Agile's done is stood on principle and been perfect, right? I mean, it's messy sometimes, right? But if I'm not going to sign up for something that's just going to fail right out of the gate, that I just know won't work.
So that's like a spool of questions now.
Yeah,
so one of the things that I was trying to figure out how to talk about, you kind of just went to anyway, which is there are people, I'm going to say it in a kind of flippant way, but there's people who just want a cheeseburger. Like you can tell them like, no, you need to eat healthy. You need to do this. I just want a cheeseburger. Bring me a cheeseburger.
They want the easy button, right? They want the easy button.
Yeah. And so they're not, I don't want to say they're not our customer, but they're not in a place where our approach is like suited for what they want. They want the quick, they want the fast, and we're not quick and we're not the easy button.
So I would love to say that this was somehow planned or pre-thought out. But one of the things that we got really, really clear on, and it's really served us well 12 years into building this company, is that we lead with marketing. That's the reason why you guys see our stuff. That's why we do podcasts. That's why our stuff's all over LinkedIn and Facebook and whatever, is because we want to get our message out. And what we're doing is we're hunting for the people that believe what we believe. Right. And as people try and fail with Agile more, there's starting to be a lot of people that are starting to recognize there's something here, but it's not just going to be a training thing. Right. We're going to have to do some work. Right. And in all fairness to Scrum and the other methodologies, right, what their mental model is start doing the practices, and then the impediments will reveal themselves, and then you deal with.
Got to do something about those impediments, though. You can't just let them sit there.
Well, but the problem is the way it actually gets sold a lot is it starts with bottom up transformation. Yeah. The kinds of impediments that you see organizationally, again, refactoring legacy mainframe, like that's just not, a Scrum Master is just not going to walk into the CIO and go, "Hey, we encountered an impediment. Do you think we could extract this service out of the mainframe and put it in the cloud so we get?" That's just not the way this goes typically, right? And so what you end up with is a bunch of people that are bastardizing the processes of Scrum and Safe because their organizational design isn't right. So it's not that Scrum and Safe don't deal with it, but I think like if you know 80 or 90% of the problems and you know exactly what's going to go wrong before you start, I think it's somewhat disingenuous to say, "Hey, let's do $1 million worth of training, and then it's going to show you all your problems that you didn't sign up to fix."
Okay.
Right. So what we try to do is we try to flip it and go like, "Okay, we'll train you, right? But here's all the problems you're going to see." And we want to do that with high integrity. Yeah. Right. And so I think I totally lost your question.
That's okay. You totally got it. And you walked right up to my second question, which is, and so you were talking a few minutes ago and it's already, it's happened. It's kind of making up for the last one. I've had a couple of moments today that I'm really psyched about.
Yeah, we had a false start. We had our first and only false start as a podcast duo here last time.
But that's good.
We recorded for an hour and that sucked.
But I think that needed to happen. So you said something that sparked an idea that I had never actually connected before. So I teach, these people in one client, they have squads. And a lot of people want to adopt the Spotify model. And you said the thing about the conditions are in place. So the conditions that were in place at Spotify when Heinrich put all that stuff in and it worked so great and everybody tries to copy it now. If those conditions aren't the same at your company and you adopt the Spotify model, you're not going to get the same results that Spotify did because you don't have those preconditions.
For sure.
And that is something that I've been, 15 years plus 10 years of project management, never thought of that before. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. But here's the interesting thing. So I'm not like a deep expert on the Spotify model, right? But
any model.
Well, no, but Spotify in particular, which I think is interesting, right? Is I look at that, right? And again, I don't know what they call everything, but with the thing that's like the equivalent of a team,
squad,
right? A squad, right? So a squad still functions like a Scrum team, doesn't it? It still kind of needs to be independent, to be able to deploy independently and work with a customer independently and all these kinds of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So as I've kind of, summarily kind of evaluated the Spotify model, like all the things that are like cross-cutting concerns are just ways of dealing with interactions across teams and dealing with things like communities of practice and how do I deal with skills and how do I deal with interrelationships and how do I deal with all that stuff. Cool, right? That's why I say same base reference architecture, just a different reference implementation for how you deal with different organizational issues. Right. Zero issue with the Spotify model, totally fine. But I don't think there's a world in which failing to encapsulate a team or failing to orchestrate a dependency when one exists is going to ever work. Right. So what you have to do is you have to recognize I don't have complete cross-functional teams that can stabilize velocity over time and actually release anything. I've got dependencies that are being dealt with late in the development cycle, and they're destabilizing my ability to do a release, or they're impacting my quality, or they're whatever. Right. And unless I fix those things, there's nothing magic about Spotify.
Okay.
Right. Either. Right. So you have to understand why Spotify works and create the conditions that enable Spotify to work, or less, or Scrum, or XP, or whatever.
Yeah. So you can, I guess where I'm going with this is it seems like you have a choice. I've got a company. I can either find a way to create the preconditions that were in place when Model X saved the day, or I can take the approach of understanding how my own preconditions have created a unique situation that has to be solved.
Well, yeah.
Right?
So again, like that is the root of the thing that I think I want to say differentiates us. And I'll even say this in all fairness, right? Like I think people are starting to get this. Like 10 years ago, I'm not sure I would have agreed. 20 years ago, it was too new. But I think people are starting to understand. Just the question is like, how do you get people to do it? Right. Which goes back to our influence game, right? How do you get people to see? So I'm going to see if I can recurse back up the tree here.
Yeah.
Right? So we were talking about leading Agile, and when people call us, and so we're a marketing company, right? We do a lot of marketing. I actually have a marketing company within Leading Agile. It's a fully functional marketing company within Leading Agile called Last Mile Media. And what Last Mile Media does for us is they originate content, right? So that's all our videos and podcasts and things like that, our graphics and things like that. And then they slice it up and they put it out into all kinds of different channels. And they measure it and they amplify it and they make sure that we're inspecting and adapting away into the right people. And then based upon the performance of what they're doing, they optimize it and they learn and they get better, right? So we have continuous flow marketing through Last Mile Media within Leading Agile, right? And that's something that we built, right? It's a really cool capability. Why do we do that? Because it is essential for my sanity, for our team's sanity, that when somebody calls, we're not starting from scratch. Right. So what we try to do is we try to educate, trying to educate the market. So the people that fill out a contact us form or reach out to me over LinkedIn or call somebody in Leading Agile and ask to talk, they're typically primed for the conversation. Okay. And so when I get into an influence situation, it's not the first time they've heard it.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things, the reason why we stopped doing salespeople around here is there was a guy, he's a really good friend of mine, still a good friend of mine to this day, who is a brilliant sales guy and absolutely killing it in market right now, doing really, really well for himself. I had to let him go. It broke my heart, right? It was awful. Know his family, know his kids, all this stuff. But the problem is that, and when it happened is he got me a meeting with the CIO of this company and that he had a relationship with, but who had not been consuming our material. And like literally, I'm like sitting in probably one of the best meetings he had ever set up for me without anything to say to the guy because I was starting from total scratch.
Which is too steep of a curve.
Too steep of a curve in 45 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And so our goal is to get people to call us that are generally familiar with our stuff, right? But even still, that they're biased towards, they've read my white paper, they've watched my videos, they've seen our marketing content, right? All these different things. They've been on Dennis's, Friday lean coffees, like whatever, right? So by the time they call us, I still have to walk them through let me understand your unique problem the way you understand it.
Yep.
I need to be able to tailor what I say to speak to that problem.
Yeah.
And what I do is I create relational safety. And the way that then once I have the safety, sometimes we have to go through that loop a bunch of times with a bunch of people in a company.
Right.
Once we've created that relational safety and they believe that we deeply understand, then they give us permission to go do something. Right. And then it's up to us to execute with fidelity to all the things that I said.
And then believing that you understand is also the part where you are building that trust and helping them understand that you see what's going on and you do have that point of view and everything like that.
Yeah. So let's pop up a layer, right? So now we're back out to our own I call, right? So, so what happened, right, is again, person not prepared, wasn't really in the right mental frame of mind. You got to remember, these are like 7:00 Eastern time. So if somebody's West Coast or, it could be mountain time, whatever, right? So you're coming in pretty hot, pretty early in the morning. And
Mike is a morning person.
Oh, I learned to be a morning person. My first job was with EDS and GM, and I was supporting IT needs of the union guys, and they all started at 6:30. So I just learned professionally to get early starts, right? But then with us in particular, if we don't do something early, it just won't happen.
Day trips, yeah.
Everybody gets busy with their clients and stuff like that. So yeah, and me too, right? So it's like we just get up. It's not the most awesome way in the world to start your day, but I mean, it's about the only thing that works, right? So we were sitting in a situation where and this is what I told the person on the phone, and this is what I tell anybody that I go sideways with on these calls. It's like the team that we've assembled at Leading Agile are some of the smartest, most informed, most experienced people that we've ever been able to hire. I mean, the caliber of talent around here is
ridiculous,
mind blowing. It's ridiculous, right? And everybody is smart, right? Everybody has the right answer. The hard part sometimes in some contexts is bringing it to a level where the other person can see and wants to hear, you know? And so what I told the person on the phone is I was like, look, like we hired you. We love you. We have every interest in you being successful. This is a friendly audience, right? I'm giving you every opportunity to understand me, ask me questions, consult for me, help me understand.
Right.
I'm generally seeking to understand. And what I think happens sometimes, and this might get to some of what you're asking, it's like, if you don't do this, if you don't use these kinds of influence techniques, what happens is that a lot of times in a client setting, the client like flips the bit and goes, oh, that person doesn't understand. Right. And then you become marginalized in the account. And I think that's what happens with employees in companies quite a bit. It's like they have the right answer, but they can't ask the right questions, and they're not influential enough to help somebody see and to move and to create safety for them. It's like that consulting, it's like the consultant asks, takes your watch and tells you the time or something like that, right? Somebody actually hit me with that joke the other day. And it's like knowing the time is the price of admission. Right. Being able to get somebody to act upon that knowledge is the hard part. And that was the kind of the teaching moment in that situation, was like totally friendly audience. And I said, at best, somebody flips the bit on you. It just doesn't want to interact with you. Worst is you get dismissed from the account, right?
It's hard though, when you have the answer and you want to impress this person, you want to be of service to them. It's like, here's the quickest way.
For sure.
I mean, I do that all the time. It's easier for me to tell you than to show you.
Well, so you're in a slightly different situation, right? Because in a situation where you're
already signed up
20 people, it's a fee for service, it's 2 days, right? I mean, your job is to have the answers, right? So if you're training, it's slightly different, right? So I think of training as like skills transfer. Mm-hmm. Like people come to your classes because they want to know how to do Scrum. Scrum's a thing. You teach them how to do Scrum.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's times where somebody comes up with a particularly hairy problem, and you're like, and you ask some clarifying questions, right?
Always,
right. Yeah. And so, yeah. But like that's the thing. It's like just having the answer is generally insufficient.
Right.
So okay, go back up a level. Like I'm going back up the.
Mike's dragging us out of the rabbit hole bit by bit.
Yeah, that's cool, right? You got to do a step at a time, though. Step at a time, right? So now we're sitting in a situation where, somebody's called Leading Agile. They've more than likely read a lot of our stuff.
Yeah,
they're a pretty informed person.
They know what the compass is and all that.
Yeah, well, most of the time they do, right? They've at least experienced all that stuff. Yeah, and so I just ask them a lot of good questions, right? And I have to have the discipline to recognize when they are capable of hearing the answer. And again, it's like ask the deep questions, teach them some things in a very non-judgmental way. But again, like those two steps are related. They just told you what their problems were because you asked them the right questions. Yeah. You teach to their problems. You create cognitive dissonance that demands resolution. And then they ask you to resolve the cognitive dissonance, right? And that's the process of doing it. And it's the only way that I've known to reliably and consistently. Because here's another interesting thing. Like I've walked into places. There's this one CIO that I was working with one time. And she had been wildly successful using extreme programming at her last company. Okay. And she leveraged that success into this new company that was way bigger. And the one thing that I kind of developed this like the way of thinking about it, like, and I don't want to take anything away from her, but I always said that she was like accidentally successful with XP because the nature of that environment were complete cross-functional teams, very productized organization,
kind of lend itself to that.
Very technologically oriented, right? Just kind of lended itself to wrapping it in Scrum and XP and getting a go of it. And she came into an incredibly tightly coupled, tangled up legacy organization and was trying to run the same playbook in that new organization. Mm-hmm. And my job was to, like, you just can't walk in and say, all the success you had, all these things, total bullshit. You're an accidental agilist, right? All this stuff. You're never going to work in this new way. I got all the right answers. Listen to me. I'm Mike Cottmeyer. I work for Leading Agile. I started this thing. She'd be like, get out of here, right? So it was a process of helping her see, right? Because she had all this experience, right? She had all this experience. So what worked? What didn't? Like, how did this? Blah, 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 right? Learn all these things. Like, well, talk to me a little bit about this organization. Boom, 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 boom. Do you have the same kind of teams that you had over there? Do you have the same kind of dependency-free environment over there? Well, no. Well, okay, cool. So like, let's talk a little bit. Like sometimes when you're not in the right context, then you have to do this, this, and this. Makes sense? Right. And it was just bringing her through the process and getting her to see that, oh yeah, there's some conditions that don't exist in my new world that I took for granted in my old. Right. Okay. That's fair. Right. And so, but if you just but you have to bring somebody through that process of creating shared cognition with you. Yeah. And again, like the thing that I can fortunately anchor on is that Leading Agile knows what it is, and we know what we do, and we know what problem we solve. We focus on very much systems first, structure, governance, and metrics. We enable those systems with practices. Then we work to help the right cultural behaviors emerge over time. And we have a very structured, disciplined way of doing that, right? It's formed around teams, backlogs, work, and test software, structure, governance, metrics, manage dependencies, break dependencies, right? All that stuff. And so if I get myself into a situation where I have the opportunity to influence somebody and we're not moving in that direction, I might swing for the fences and double down
over the brute force
somebody or whatever, because I can't help them if I can't get them to see that. Right. And if I'm going to walk away from the opportunity, then I'm just going to swing for the fences and try to get them to see.
Well, at least that way they heard your answer.
They heard the truth, right. And it's happened more than once. If I'm guessing, probably 3, 4, 5 times where we told somebody the truth and they decided not to sign up with us.
Then they came back.
It came back a year or two later when it didn't work. I would rather have that deal than to fight on the front side.
Yeah, because you don't want to convince somebody to fall in love with you. They have to come ready for that.
Well, it's hard, right? Because it's just like, it's like there's so much stuff going on in the industry, and people tell stories, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I really do believe that the people that take this approach believe that if you train people on practices, impediments will reveal themselves, and then you'll systematically take out the impediments. Like the teams will self-organize and do that. Just in practice, I just don't see it. I'm not saying it's impossible for it to work that way. Just in practice, I think it's a low probability chance of it actually working that way. What I see is it's way easier to break Scrum than it is to break dependencies. I like that line. I'm going to use that again. It's way easier to break Scrum than it is to break dependencies.
Trademark. So one of the things I feel like I'm kind of seeing, which I had not noticed before, was that there's definitely people out there who try to come across like I am Moses and you just do what I tell you. I'm going to lead you through. But this is very much a practitioner based. Like it's not, we are, the all knowing. It's we'll come to where you are. Like we do this too. We have these same problems. We see these same things. Here's what we see work. You're trying to be the practitioner with them, right?
Well, so again, right, it all gets into like who you're selling to and what you're selling. So like we have one of the leaders in our organization is a longtime friend and colleague of mine, a guy named Brian Sonnegaard. And so Brian, he and I met, we were working at a company called Check Free. It got acquired by Fiserv. And then I ended up going down version 1 path, pillar path, started leading Agile 12 years ago. He started getting promoted like crazy, was a CIO of a big division over there. And a lot of the stuff that leading Agile has evolved over the last 12 years had its core in that work that we did together when I was a project manager and he was a director of development, right? And we were this huge outsized influence game at CheckFree back in those days. And when we came into that organization, we had a much smaller footprint of consultants because, for one, we were smaller as a company, but also we had a leader that like deeply, deeply, deeply understood the problem. And you not only had positional authority, but influence across the organization and up the organization. And if you have an organizational leader that gets it, really, really deeply gets it, and is looking and is willing to wield that influence and that power and take those political risks. I'm not saying that like a lone gun consultant can come in and make a real big difference, right? Because if you've got that leader underneath your belt or in your, toolkit, right? Whatever. Yeah, I'm looking for something there. Then a lot of times they can be that force multiplier for you. Often in some of the organizations that we're running into, we have those force multipliers, but it still is 30 or 40 people on the ground, systematically, trying to help these organizations make these changes. Yeah. So again, right. I mean, I'm just super non-judgmental, right? If you guys want to lead with practices, you like a single consultant model, like that, sage in the wilderness kind of model, like, sure, like whatever, right? I mean, whatever works for people. I just know that there is a class of organizations out there that really need a structured and disciplined approach to doing this, because they're literally, changing the wheels on the bus while it's going down the road at 80 miles an hour. I mean, it's just like, there's just not a lot of room for error. Yeah. There's not a lot of room for trial and error. And so that's kind of the niche that we've fallen into. But getting back to this kind of original hypothesis here, it's like, how do you know, who's a good fit for us, or how do you know if you're a good fit for us? It's like if the messages resonate, right, is what it comes down to. Very much like we decided a long time ago, and it's worked out really well for us, is that we're a hammer looking for nails. And it's like, I'm not a screwdriver, I'm not a wrench, I'm not whatever. Like, we solve a class of problem, we solve it away. We're actually incredibly flexible. And it's funny, right? Because it's like, sometimes I think we get kind of, I don't know, it's accused isn't the right word, but I think sometimes on the outside looking in, it can feel very dogmatic because we have a very strong point of view. Yeah. But a very strong point of view is really, really simple. Got to form teams, got to build backlogs, got to be able to produce working tested software. And in some form or fashion, you have to very proactively manage dependencies. Yeah. And the only way you're going to really get to Agile is if you start to systematically break dependencies. It's like that simple. Like, that's the core. Like, anything else in that is rather flexible, as long as we can anchor on those core principles. So we talk about those core principles, and the people that resonate with those core principles, and they see it, right? Because they've experienced it, they've tried, they've failed, they've done whatever. They don't want to take any big, gigantic risks on the front side. They want to do a structured discipline, right? What have you? They go, okay, I'm a nail, right? Okay, let's go hire
this is sort of like almost like you're Neo, and you can kind of wave your hand and everything turns into nails.
Well, so that's part of the art, right? It's like, as a company that's an ongoing concern, we deeply believe that this is the thing that is getting in the way of organizations adopting Agile. Like, 100% believed it in my soul for longer than the 12 years we've been in business. And so I'm willing to go to market and say, this is the truth, because I believe it is the truth. And if you don't believe it's the truth, then cool, right?
Yeah, God bless you.
God bless you. Godspeed. Do what you got to do, right? It's your company. No obligation to hire us. Yeah. But that's what we do, right? And so we're just super clear about what we do. And the people that think we can help, call us. And then it's not a 24-month sales cycle. It's sometimes it's like, get on the phone, get alignment, decide to do something. Within a couple of months, usually we can kind of figure out an approach that works for everybody. So,
cool. Yeah. This was awesome. Thank you very much for this. I don't want to ask you any more questions because it's in a really good place.
We're just in a good place. I did a good job. You
were great, man.
Roll all the way down and then brought you right back up.
Yep. You went and This was great. All right. I'm going to include information if people want to email you or whatever with questions they can. But thank you very much. And we'll be back.
Have you just given up on the ask me a weird question at the end of this thing?
I didn't prepare. I was so worried about the topic for today after last time. I didn't come up with a weird question.
Okay. Well, next
you want to ask me a weird question?
No, I got no weird questions for you. The only thing I will tell you that I thought about you, because you have this, like, you live in New York City.
Yeah.
You have like this crazy small, like 650 square
600 square feet.
Yeah. My wife and I, Kimmy, we went up to New York for a long weekend about 7 weeks ago. I say about, for some reason, it's exactly 7 weeks ago. It was about 8 weeks ago. So about 8 weeks ago. And we were staying in this little place in the garment district.
You were right near me. I live in Chelsea. Close? Yeah, you were right nearby.
I was just Garment District. I guess it was West Side, overlooking New Jersey. So I gave my wife a little bit of crap for getting us a view that overlooked New Jersey, but it's okay. I'm just teasing with my people from New Jersey. So, but anyway, so I thought about you because we walked in this place and it was like 650 square feet. And I'm like, Dave's whole family lives in the place.
Yeah. Three people, 2 cats.
It's like as big as my kitchen.
Yeah.
I was like trying to figure out, I'm like, wow.
My whole apartment is smaller than the room you're in right now.
Oh, for sure. Oh yeah. Right. So it's the advantage of living in rural Georgia over downtown New York. Now, but you guys have way better food within walking distance, no doubt.
Oh, and we have more interesting smells too.
Oh, for sure. And I see your Facebook posts about all the people that are flinging stuff at each other.
Yes, especially the machetes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was thinking more like wasn't there like some feces thrower at one point?
Oh yeah, there's always, that's just like Tuesday. That's constant.
That's the run of mill. Not even worth mentioning. You got to start throwing machetes before it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a surprising amount of machete attacks in New York City, which is just always weird. It's like the most common weapon.
So I'll tell you can include this in the podcast or not, unedited if you want. But when my wife and I were up there, we were watching that show on Netflix, Inventing Anna. Have you seen that show?
Yeah, my daughter and my wife were extras in it. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's super cool, right? Yeah. So we really kind of got into that show. That lady that does it, she did the Bridgerton thing too, and I'm probably going to totally give up my man card for telling you. But she's
it's
really
right.
good.
It's not like you're watching Gilmore Girls.
Yeah, but like that building that was down like off of Park Avenue and like 22nd or something like that. The one that was like where she was trying to build the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like we were wandering around New York and we're like, hey, let's go see if we can find that building. We walked all the way over there and checked it out. So that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Fun New York moment. You guys got a lot of stuff going on up there.
There's a lot of cool stuff going on here.
Tiny places to live.
I think of it like this. Other people, they work and they save money and they go on vacation. We live where people go on vacation. For sure. So that's the trade-off.
For sure. Awesome, man. Well, thank you for having me, man.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This is great.
Okay, cool.